it's going to come down to this defense, though. Can they cover? Can they cover? The back seven, just to reiterate the recent years here, the Falcons did not have a good defense. They kind of came together during the Super Bowl year. They were probably better in 2017, especially Deion Jones looked like he was the best coverage linebacker in the NFL that year, making game-ending plays, game-changing plays. 2018, Deion Jones misses time, and that whole back seven falls apart. They can't stop anybody. And then last year, even with Deion Jones on the field, it was one of the worst it was one of the worst secondaries in the NFL. And they came into the offseason saying, okay, where do we go here? And they're going into the season saying, okay, our starting corners are some combination of Isaiah Oliver, who's played a little bit and not great, former second-round pick, A.J. Terrell, their first-round pick out of Clemson, who has some warts. He's had some really good games. He did get, compared to other first-round picks, he got beat, a little bit more. Kendall Sheffield, who flashed some ability last year as a fourth-round pick. Jordan Miller, 2019 fifth-round pick. I mean, they don't have many options at cornerback that you go into the season saying, hey, I feel good about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the defense generally, I think we're just looking at a relative lack of talent compared with certainly where they used to be compared to some other teams. They're in that spot of they need some of these. Well, they need A.J. Terrell basically to play really well for them to have any kind of shot. It's like what we were saying about the offensive line. Like if that was a pick for this year, it's risky. Like that's just tough to expect a rookie to hit the ground running and be good. A pick for the future, fine, but this team kind of needs him to actually hold his own. The training camp videos has been him one-on-one with Julio Jones the whole time. I mean, that might accelerate your development a little bit, dealing with that every week in practice, but like there's a lot on his shoulders to be good right out of the gate. And you remember the Panthers used to have this defense that was like there was one star at every level, but nothing else. So, up front it was K'Wan Short. Then in the middle it was Luke Kuechly. And then the back end there was Josh Norman for that amazing season. This is kind of how I feel about this defense, right? Like up front you got Grady Jarrett, who's one of the most underrated defensive linemen in the NFL. Over the past 2 years, I think, he's got like the best grade that isn't Aaron Donald, obviously with the standard caveat.
The non-Aaron Donald
Yeah, he's
division.
got, I think, the best grade. It's above 90 over 2 years. Deion Jones in the middle. And then, whether A.J. Terrell plays well or not, but Keanu Neal is the star in the secondary. So you've got those three guys, all of whom, A, need to play their best game, and then B, they need some help from somewhere. And it's hard to know where it's coming from looking at the rest of this group.
You mentioned all the first-round picks on the offensive line. Let's discuss all the first-round picks on the defensive line now. They bring in – so they have been throwing first-round picks at edge rushers for a while here. Vic Beasley was one of them. He's out. But Takk McKinley, their 2017 first-rounder. They bring in Dante Fowler. They traded for Charles Harris. It's a whole bunch of retread first-rounders. And then Grady Jarrett, who you mentioned, who should have been a first-rounder, was a PFF first-rounder, but went in the fifth round. He's obviously been the best of the bunch. And then they spent their second-round pick on Marlon Davidson. He's a 300-pounder who essentially played on the edge at Auburn. I'm wary about projecting him because he played so much outside the tackles last year at Auburn, and it was one of those, like, here's an impressive rush from a 300-pounder and a guy bending the edge and all these different things, but I don't think he's going to be doing that. Not on this defense either, with those guys I mentioned, with Takk, with Dante Fowler, with Charles Harris. They're going to be on the outside. Like Marlon Davidson needs to win on the interior, and he showed that he could do it a little bit. He just doesn't have much experience there. So expectations for both first-round, both of their top two picks, A.J. Terrell and Marlon Davidson, are high. Like they need both of those guys to contribute right away. I just have my doubts right now.
Yeah, the one to talk about, I think, is Dante Fowler, right? Because you bring him in, he was playing second fiddle to Aaron Donald with the Rams and had a career year, and he comes in, 15-sack season, right?
15 sacks.
If you're just looking at like the box score numbers, you're like, wow, 15-sack season, we massively upgraded the pass rush, right? We shipped off one underachiever in Vic Beasley, and we bring in a guy who had 15 sacks last season. Everything's looking up. And look, so 15 sacks, 67 total pressures, which is probably the more important number, right? We preach all the time that sacks are a bad way of predicting future performance.
See the Packers coach rant?
Yes.
On that? That was good.
I don't want to say they're lucky, but they are subject to luck.
How about
Sacks.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily lucky plays, but they are subject to a lot of luck and a lot of outside influence, right? So immediately you're far better off focusing on pressure than you are sacks if you're looking to predict a guy's future performance. Now, you're better, but it doesn't mean you're great, right? Pressure is not a golden, it's not a silver bullet either. So 67 total pressures, which is good, but his pass rush grade was 73.3, which is okay. I think it's the best of his career, but it's not like, elite, right? Elite pass rush grades are 90, the same way they are with every other facet in PFF's numbers. So 73 is obviously not in that category. But so how do you explain that, right? And a huge part of it is those unblocked, clean up the stuff that other people are causing, right? Other people like Aaron Donald.
Like an Aaron Donald.
Aaron Donald comes up the middle, wrecks a blocking scheme, the play's gone to hell, the quarterback's moving around, and oh, look, here's Dante Fowler cleaning it up. And a huge part of the Rams' relative inefficiency before is that Donald was making these plays and there was nobody on the edge to deal with it, right? He would cause chaos. Quarterback would just bounce outside and make a play anyway. Now, Fowler at least helped some of that, but I would be very wary. And I know we just talked about how good Grady Jarrett is, but he's not Aaron Donald, right? He may be the next best thing, but there's still a huge gulf between Grady Jarrett and Aaron Donald. So I think you just have to be wary about expecting the 15 sacks to repeat or even the 67 pressures to repeat, because if the huge proportion of his cleanup and unblocked pressure disappears, you're left with a guy that isn't actually winning one-on-one that often.
Because the better number than even pressures is the pass rush grade. And
yes,
essentially Dante Fowler had a career-high 73.3 pass rush grade last year, which is fine. That's good. It's solid. That usually doesn't translate to 67 pressures.
No.
That's the thing, right? So that's another way of using Premium Stats 2.0, and you can go look at Fowler's pass rush grades. They've literally gotten better every year, so that's good.
Mm-hmm.
He's on the upward trajectory. He's kind of a late blooming former first rounder. He was good in the run game last year. He had his best year. He has gotten better every single season, but to expect, 67 pressures and 15 sacks might be a little rich.
Right. So 24 of those pressures were either cleanup, unblocked, or pursuit plays, right? Which are not, it's not to say those are worthless, but those are plays you expect any edge rusher to make, right? If you're
those are dependent plays, essentially. You're dependent on other stuff, either the quarterback holding the ball too long, you're dependent on opportunities sometimes, or you're just dependent on other pressure.
That's a really good way of putting it, I think. So more than a third of his pressure last year was dependent on something else.
Yep.
So if those circumstances don't present themselves again this year, a third of his pressures immediately disappeared. And if you take that down and you go from 67 to 42 or whatever that is, that's not great.
Yeah.
Like 42 is rank average, essentially, for a guy on the edge.
So Charles Harris, I mentioned too, former first-round pick, didn't have his fifth-year option picked up by the Miami Dolphins. I don't mind taking flyers on those types of guys. Harris has never learned how to really win with power. And when I wrote his scouting report a couple years ago, I was like, hey, best spin move in college football, which is probably not the best, that's not the thing you're going to hang your hat on at the next level unless you have other ways to win, and Harris hasn't really shown that. So they're stitching it together up front with the defensive line. There's a lot of pressure, I think, on Grady Jarrett to be really good again.
Mm-hmm.
Foye Oluokun, the other linebacker next to Deion Jones, speedy guy. I mean, I think a little bit more play from him next to Deion Jones if those guys stay healthy. It's a good group of linebackers, I think, for today's NFL. I like watching those guys play. Oluokun has played a little bit of football, but I think he'll have more opportunities this year next to Deion Jones. He had a 62 grade last year, but he's flashed some ability in coverage, 310 snaps. Last season, Devondre Campbell moves on, who never really panned out as the coverage player that they expected. But I think they just have so many questions on the back end. It's tough to. It's tough to believe in the Falcons going forward here in this season.
Like I say, a lot rests on A.J. Terrell, but I can see a world, if he plays well as a rookie, I can see the secondary actually being okay. Like Keanu Neal was a surprise player to us, but is clearly a difference maker for that secondary, even if he hasn't quite sort of replicated his, hit the ground running and made us look like idiots. But since then, he hasn't really gotten back to that level. So he's a big player for them. Ricardo Allen's a solid player. Like Isaiah Oliver is okay if he doesn't have to be the number one.
I explained away the Keanu Neal thing, though.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because we only had 1 year of data, and he didn't grade well. But it was when you dug into the data and said, okay, when he played free safety at Florida, which he was asked to do a lot, he was really bad. But when he played in the box and he played the role that he's playing in the NFL, that he did a nice job. So that would actually be kind of a win for the data, I think, in hindsight, because if you dig into it the right way, you can slot the player in where he needs to go in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean...
Plus, nobody remembers that we missed on Keanu Neal 5 years ago. You didn't have to bring it up.
Okay, yeah. I mean, maybe a better point is that he hasn't actually replicated that season since.
No, he hasn't.
So
he's still living off that.
Right. He played the next year and wasn't nearly as good, particularly in coverage, and then basically hasn't played the last 2 years because of injury.
He's also one of those flashy, strong, big hit here, big hit there, and it's missed tackles. He's still not great.
He's like the Rashaan Evans thing, right? He's a highlight reel player. Which automatically, those guys are always overrated because you're not paying attention to the stuff that isn't in the highlights. You're only seeing the big plays that look great. But whatever, I think he's solid, right? And if everything else around him is good, I think he'd be good. So I think there's a world in which this secondary is good, but the whole thing hinges on A.J. Terrell being able to hold up essentially as a starting / number one corner, which for a rookie is always tough.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.